Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Film Studies Online discussion of Drive-Away Dolls. I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Paul Wright. Paul, how are you this evening?
Good. How are you, Andrew?
I'm fine, thank you. As some of you I'm sure know, Paul Wright is our BMFI Coen Brothers expert, having taught courses on their films before. And so uh, we he made a great introduction to this film, giving us some ideas of what we might expect and some of the Coen brothery things to look for. And so he'll be sharing his insights tonight, and I will be sharing. I don't know if I have insights as much as opinions, but I'll be sharing something. And we look forward to hearing from you, of course, with your thoughts on Driveway Dolls. Before we get to that, a little bit of business. Please keep yourself on mute until or unless I call on you, and you will let me know that you wish to ask a question or make a comment because you'll use the raise hand function within Zoom. And then after you ask your question or make your comment, please remute so we don't have any weird sounds or anything like that. You can also, of course, chat amongst yourselves in the chat window. And if folks don't wish to speak but want to put something in the chat window, we will try to make sure it bubbles up to the conversation when there is an opportunity. And with that, I think we are set. We've got a small group tonight, which either has something to do with people being burnt out on movies because the Oscars just occurred, or it is a reflection on people's interest in discussing this movie. So I am wondering if any folks who are in attendance would care to offer up a question or comment. And Gus, welcome.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I just wanted to say that to start out with that I saw both of you guys on FYI Philly and a handsome duo you make.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two questions, one a minor one and one maybe a little bit more important. The first one is I'm not a big fan of Henry James, but I get lost in the dependent clauses. But I was wondering, I thought, what I know of him, it's kind of like he deals with social rules and manners and things like that, which seem to be, if you guys agree, I'm not sure whether that's an ironic use in this particular film. And the other bigger question to me is, do you think that the incredible stress on female gay sexuality in this reduce the characters too much to just their sexual wants instead of creating bigger characters or more rounded characters. Even though I thought both the performances were very good by the leads, even the one that's more restrained almost is depicted as being repressed.
Two interesting comments, Gus. Thank you. Paul, do you want to start us off?
Sure. References to Henry James. I'm a little rusty on my Henry James. It's been a long time. Although you mentioned the prose style of James being a challenge, and that is actually brought up in the course of the film. I think it's the Margaret Qualley character, Jamie, who says something to the effect that Henry James pretty much put her off reading. Even though she had been exposed to him. But I wish I had more to say about James than that. It's been way too long. The other question, I think, is an interesting one to ponder, the sexuality of the film and the unapologetic sexuality and discussions of sexuality in the film. Maybe a way to think about this is what Ethan Coen has said in interviews about his purpose, along with Trisha Cook, his wife, in making the film. One was to do a lesbian road trip movie, right? So we're within the realm of a pretty time-honored genre, the road trip, but we're approaching it from a non-heteronormative perspective. And I think that was definitely part of the intent. Something else that Ethan Coen also said I found interesting was that he wanted this to have a 70s exploitation vibe, not in the sense of Quentin Tarantino's riff on exploitation, but more in the vein of sort of sex exploitation films of the 70s and 80s. And so the raunchiness of it, I think, is in many respects, again, intended. Whether that works for an audience or not is a whole other question. But I think they made the film they wanted to make. I don't think anyone got in their way. So, like it or not, right? This is what they were going for. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with what Gus posited, that too much or an excessive focus on that sort of thing, I think tends to diminish most stories because other elements of characterization get washed out. That's actually my criticism, my biggest criticism of Poor Things. I thought the most interesting parts of that movie were when we saw her understanding things outside of her basic pleasures and sort of reasoning and things like that. And in this movie, you know, I don't, I think there's something to be said for the characters, wanting that kind of freedom. But on the other hand, it's not like the film was set 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. And it doesn't seem like that, there were that many cultural obstacles to them pursuing their interests in that arena. I mean, they find a friendly bar in every town, and they seem to have active social lives with members of their communities. So I thought that was sort of one of the things that didn't really hold together as a sort of, driving force enough for a narrative of a feature film. Gus, do you have another comment, or is your hand just up again accidentally? Yes, accidentally. Okay. Well, we don't seem to have any other questions. All right, now it's up again. Is that an accident, Gus? I guess it is. Okay. Well, one of the things that I would be curious to know from the folks who've joined us, what they liked about the film, if they found it to be successful, and on its own terms of what it was, apparently trying to be, or what they found made it seem like Coen Brothers movies they come to expect, but also a departure from that as well. And I'm wondering if anyone has any thoughts on that. Excuse me. I guess what I would say is that I found, so I see a movie that has, these two sort of henchmen who are kind of, an incongruous pair, sent on a mission after a woman who doesn't really understand why she's being followed, or they're attempting to kidnap her. And my mind goes to Fargo, right? But I think there's some really notable differences and things that don't work as well, which is that I understood the stakes in that movie. And even though obviously it's a very terrible thing for someone in financial trouble to stage a kidnapping of their spouse so their father-in-law will give them money, I understand it. I know what that means. I know what the stakes are. I know why it's being done. I thought the idea that the movie wants us to follow these women on this journey and fear for their safety, when it doesn't become clear until 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through why what they have is what the stakes are. I thought that was a big misstep. And frankly, I didn't think that it made much sense once we did find what the ostensible stakes were. But Paul, I'm wondering got any, if you got a Fargo vibe or a quasi Fargo vibe, or if, knowing what you do about their movies, anything else jumped to mind?
No, you were right on it. I too was thinking back to other Coen films, and Fargo came to mind, particularly with the two criminals on a road trip together, getting on each other's nerves. And on the one hand, I feel bad picking on Joey Slotnick and C.J. Wilson, who play the two here. I mean, no one's going to be Peter Stormare and Steve Buscemi, right? Although it'd been an interesting casting coup if they could have gotten the two of them to play those parts. See, that to me would have been an interesting move. Not necessarily the same characters, but maybe have
Right.
them play these two. But that's wishful thinking. I agree with Andrew that a lot of things did not cohere for me in the movie and disappointed me. And if we're looking at the Coen brothers' individual efforts since their temporary decoupling, because they are getting back together, no worries there. I think they always intended to work together again, but they're taking a break. If you look at what Joel has done with Frances McDormand, his spouse, in The Tragedy of Macbeth, I just have to say it holds up a whole lot better than what Ethan has done with his spouse, Trisha Cook, much as I respect both of them. And a lot of people don't know about Trisha Cook, but not only is she Ethan's wife, but she has been editing for the Coens and doing other things for them in every production since 1990 or thereabouts. And this has been a passion project of hers for a long time. I think Ethan wanted to make it happen. She identifies as queer. That is her word in an interview, and they seem to have a non-conventional marriage. And so making a lesbian road trip movie wasn't just something Ethan got in his head to do. It's something Trisha has wanted to do, and the story seed has been there for a long time, and they finally got around to making it. But again, I don't find it all coheres for me, or is plausible even within the bizarre universe of a Coen film, allowing the implausibilities of a Coen film. I don't think it coheres the way it ought to. And I don't know how to put my finger on it. And maybe people who didn't like the movie, maybe more than I didn't like it, maybe they will shudder when I say this, but I actually kind of wished it was a bit longer and a bit more things were added to it to flesh it out, to give us more time with those characters, and maybe to have more relatable stakes, as Andrew was getting at. And we just didn't have that. The other nagging sense I had watching it, I did feel like I didn't stop thinking about it in the days since I've seen it, which was last week. So whatever that means, I haven't stopped thinking about it. And I do remember when I watched The Big Lebowski when it first came out, that came on the heels of Fargo. And I didn't like The Big Lebowski when I first saw it. Heresy, I know. I didn't like it. I didn't get it. And maybe that's because I had all these expectations of what the follow up to Fargo would be. And of course, the Coens are always good at shifting gears on you. You'll see them, you'll expect them to zig and they'll zag. And over time, of course, I came to appreciate Big Lebowski enormously. I teach it every time just about I do a Coens class. I love the film now. So I'm sitting there watching Drive Away Dolls and asking myself, am I going to have a different feeling about it down the road? Is this a kind of quirky, idiosyncratic cult classic that I'm just not getting right now? And maybe I'll get later, or someone will help me get it. And I just don't know the answer to that question. I tend to think not. I tend to think it won't ever become the kind of film Lebowski is. But I wonder how much of that is partly my expectations going in. And my expectations of a Coen film, whether it's one or both brothers, is pretty high. I did read an interesting review, Andrew. I thought it stood out from a lot of other reviews I've read, pro and contra. One reviewer, and I got to go back and find the name, said that this film was a joyous celebration of an unimportant movie, a movie that was proudly trivial, proudly unimportant. in an era when every movie is coming out of the gate and wants to be Killers of the Flower Moon or Oppenheimer or whatever. We have these long, ponderous, thoughtful movies that I love. But this reviewer found a kind of escape in Drive Away Dolls from everything being, why so serious? I'll riff on Christopher Nolan for a minute. And maybe from that point of view, there are pleasures to be found in the film that I didn't catch the first time out. But it didn't work for me. I'll just be honest. I know it didn't work for Andrew either.
Those are interesting points, and I have some thoughts, but I want to get to Jeff's question or comment.
Hi, this is really a question hopefully you can decipher. There was a number of scenes, probably lengthy scenes of the dogs at the dog track with some kind of muzzle over them. It seemed to me we couldn't figure out why there was so much time spent on the dog and the dog track. And then, is it typical of Coen? So that's question one. Sorry to bundle these together. The second one is, how do we interpret, like, is it typical for a Coen Brothers film to have, when they handed off the money to what was he, a senator or something, and then he went around an alley, he comes back, pulls the hat over his face, and he comes back with a gun. So, like, is that typical of the Coen Brothers film to have that kind of twist? I mean, you would think he would have just got what he wanted and moved on.
So there are so many filmmakers who try to be Coen-esque in their movies, just like so many try to imitate, for example, Tarantino. I almost feel like this was one of those movies. It was trying to be Coen-esque, and it had Coen DNA in it for sure, literally, and yet didn't, again, for me, cohere. And you mentioned the final scenes with Matt Damon. I was fine with the casting of the film overall. I mean, I enjoy all the actors who were brought to bear. But as I think Andrew was getting at earlier, I never understood the real stakes for the senator or anyone else, with his plaster dildo. I mean, just to be frank about it, I didn't understand how it would be linked to him in any kind of provable way that would have jeopardized his political career. I didn't mind the plot device itself. In fact, my wife pointed out it's based on a real person, Cynthia Plastercaster, who is, the film is dedicated to her in the final moments of the credits. This was a real person who took plaster casts of famous people's penises, including Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, and other people. So there's a real life inspiration. So I didn't mind them drawing on that at all. But I felt like there were gaps in the narrative logic that would have made me appreciate the absurdity of that. I'm not a prude. I'm quite the opposite. I'm ready to enjoy a lesbian road trip movie with, Cynthia Plastercaster or Miley Cyrus apparently playing Cynthia Plastercaster. Apparently she did a cameo. I'm ready for that movie. I just don't think I got that movie. I think I got a draft of that movie. And that's how the film, I think, affected me. It felt like a first effort that shouldn't have been the final effort that we got on screen. As far as the dog track goes, the kidnapping of the protagonists, they are taken to the dog track. So I think that's why we're seeing those images. But what they are meant to embody metaphorically, I'm not sure. I don't even think they were necessary to the scene. And that was another scene that I had trouble with because when Flint, I think that's his name, the one played by C.J. Wilson, he ends up killing both Coleman Domingo and Joey Slotnick. I sort of understood where that was coming from because he had been berated the whole movie by Joey Slotnick. But even that felt rather forced. And so I had no sense of again, stakes. I think that was Andrew's word. And that's what the movie to me was lacking.
Yeah, I understand the question, Jeff, because there was clearly, it seemed to be a purpose or an effort to show us that footage of the dogs running beyond simply an establishing shot of, oh, you're at a dog track. And so, you know, I don't have any answer to that that is a good answer. The more cynical part of me says, well, the movie was already short as it was, so they had a, they added a, 20 or 30 seconds that way. And the other cynical part of me was they made the effort to get that footage, which isn't natural footage that would normally be available during a race. So they were going to use it. It's interesting to look at. It's beautiful to look at. If there's some sort of symbolism of, beautiful natural creatures being contained for the pleasure of someone or something, I don't think this movie was making points like that anywhere else. So I don't give that a lot of currency. So that's sort of, what I would say about that. Sue, you have a question or comment?
Sure, this is her husband, Jim. On your comments and the discussion about it not being connected, to me, it almost felt like it was a checklist of things that we have to have in a road trip meeting. For example, a road trip movie. So, for example, I personally found the stopping at the music house where the guy was mumbling. What point did that have in the movie other than a road trip movie has to have a scene like that? Even things like that seem to be okay. We have to have these 5 scenes in a road trip movie, and we're going to put these 5 scenes in kind of to do the movie. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Paul, you want to start?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you're suggesting, as I think you are, that it's kind of paint by numbers in terms of genre, I think you're right. I think we needed to be more invested in the Wilson and Slotnick characters, the hitmen or whatever they are, to have cared about them being the fish out of water in that club. Maybe more time with them in that club would have been interesting because they were misdirected there, right, by allies of the protagonists that they assumed they could manipulate. But I agree, there are a lot of elements of the film that are kind of rote, and that is not usually what the Coens do with genre. I mean, one of the reasons I love them is that they take existing genres and will take paint by numbers elements of that genre, but repurpose them in really offbeat and interesting ways that make you rethink the genre, that make you rethink whether the movie you're watching, if it's a really good Coen film, it makes you rethink whether it even fits that genre category to begin with. And that to me was missing. I really felt like it needed more flesh to and pardon the pun. I mean, the movie had plenty of flesh, but it needed more narrative ligature for me to invest in the way that I was totally ready to do. I was primed to really embrace the film, and there are things about it I do like. I don't mean to sound like I don't, but I remember when Andrew and I were exchanging emails about just confirming time or whatever. He said, "Oh, this was not a good movie," and I had to agree basically. And we were wondering like what kind of discussion we would have of a film that isn't executed particularly well. And I actually think this is really interesting. I think it's just as important to have these conversations about movies that don't hit home runs or even ground rule doubles. Uh, I think you've got to confront those films too and ask what are your criteria, right, for a film that works versus one that doesn't. And that doesn't mean I don't respect the effort that went into the film. This is a passion project, especially for Trisha. But that doesn't mean you're guaranteed a success. And we talk in these online discussions and in our classrooms about a lot of great movies that deservedly should be celebrated. But I think it's really valuable every once in a while to talk about something that doesn't work.
Well, and in a way, because sort of like, on the surface, you could see how this fits into the Coen brothers milieu. And in that regard, it's valuable. In addition to the reasons you said, it's valuable because it helps put their work, the best of their work into relief by being able to say, by plot points, this, you can say this might be roughly comparable, but what are the differences? Why do the best Coen Brothers movies, whether it's Raising Arizona, the ones that have a caper journey, bad people following the heroes sort of, arrangement, what makes the best of those work? And, so by seeing what in this one didn't. And, I used to teach college, and when you work in a film program at a college, most of the people who do the teaching are film studies, history, theory people like myself. And most of the students want to be filmmakers. So I had a lot of filmmaking students in my intro to film class who would say, I don't know why I have to learn all this stuff. I want to make movies. Well, the answer is because you need to know what's come before, you need to understand the language, and you need to know the genres, the forms that people recognize, so you can take them and then depart from them in a productive and constructive way. And I think that's where that's the part this movie's missing, right? It nails a lot of the pieces of the genre, just like all the Coens do, but it seems like there was more thought in the best of the Coen Brothers work. There's more thought into what the purpose of the divergences from the standard genre formula are. And here there didn't seem to be as much of that. It's almost seems to me like this movie was made 25 or 30 years too late. And if this movie had been made 30 years ago, the identity elements of the main characters, and frankly of the world that much of the film is set in, might have been enough of a departure and new enough to have that significance that the other Coen Brothers departures seem to. But it's almost like it was written 30 years ago and then put in a drawer, and they didn't come out and sort of go over it again before they just started making it almost. And I know that that's a very, very, cavalier thing to say when you think about all the things it takes to get a commercial feature film made. But, I think it's quite possible that the same thing that made those of us who saw it see it, which was the pedigree, might have made the people who finance it. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Gus.
I think I want to comment again about the problem with the payoff. The stakes were when I hit the thing where what was in the suitcase, what was in the in the briefcase, it was kind of like, oh, we're in a really wacky situation, but what everything came before it wasn't wacky enough, so it just seemed like a bad mixture of tone to me. Like, even though there was a lot of funny dialogue, I do think some of the dialogue was pretty funny, although I kind of cringed a bit here and there when I was listening to it because it was so out there. But it just felt like there was an inconsistency in tone, because we kind of went all the way when we got to that point with the briefcase opening and with the whole Matt Damon character. I felt like, well, if this was going to be that farcical, it should have been that way all the way. I mean, that's the way I felt anyway.
That makes sense to me, what you're saying. I was thinking about Matt Damon's character. Glad to have him in the movie. He can play that part. But we never really encounter him in his own element at any point in the film. We only meet him at the end when he's trying to be inconspicuous in a lesbian bar, which really doesn't make sense, especially because he has a known face, right? I mean, this is a famous guy. He's not even wearing any kind of actual disguise, just a hat. And so he seems all kinds of desperate to resolve the situation. That's the only encounter we have with him in the film, other than, I think, a billboard where he's portrayed as the family values senator or whatever. But I would have liked some scenes where we see him in that element. We see him as a politician. We don't maybe know yet what he's trying to protect, like what dark secret he's harboring, but we know he has one. And we didn't have connecting scenes like that. I felt like there were actors in this that were underutilized in certain ways. Pedro Pascal, for example. I mean, he's as hot as you get right now. And how do you not give us more time with him? Even if he dies at the beginning, which he does, why not have a flashback or some kind of understanding, right, of why this guy had the fixation on collecting these dildos that he did? You've got a guy who's got great comedic sensibilities. He's not just a dramatic actor, he's funny. And you kind of waste him to let him be decapitated at the beginning of the film. I don't get that. You know, there's no reason to have him in the movie or Matt Damon in the movie if they're going to be that underutilized.
Well, and there's really no reason to have the whole Pedro Pascal scene to begin with, and there's certainly no reason for them to be carrying his head around. I mean, that doesn't seem like that's any part of the deal, because by that logic, there would have to be the heads of everyone who's ever had the briefcase, and that's obviously not what's happening. It doesn't sort of make internal sense, and that's what's frustrating. Kathleen, you have a question or comment?
Hi. Yes, I was very disappointed by the movie, and not because it was a Coen movie and I expected more, but it had two young female characters who I thought I could get to know and perhaps like, and I could see them grow along their road trip, and learn more about them and see their relationship grow. And I don't think I saw that at all. There were things they could have shown us about themselves. Why that one woman loved reading Henry James, I would love to know, but they didn't give me a clue. So I was very disappointed in it. In fact, I would have left halfway through the movie, but I decided I would stay so that I could hear our discussion.
Yeah,
Well,
I would go ahead, Andrew. I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to thank Kathleen for sticking it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I stick out any movie I start. I'm never one to bail. No matter what, I'm going to watch it, try to make sense of it. Yes, I think you're right. You know, I was saying the heavy hitters like Damon and Pascal were underutilized, but I actually think the leads were underutilized. I have no problem with these two young actors. They're great. Margaret Qualley has talent. Geraldine Viswanathan has talent. And I agree, more time with them as people would have added so much to the film. And I don't mean you would have had to cut out the raunchy stuff. I'm fine with that, but just layer it a bit more with other dimensions of who these people are, because I think more time spent with them would have served the movie well. I think one could watch this movie, say in Margaret Qualley's performance, and maybe come away disappointed and say she's just a Nepo baby and doesn't have talent. She's the daughter of Andy McDowell, as some of you may know, but she has talent, and I think it's on display in glimpses in the film. If you want to see her really shine, there's a limited series starring her and her mother, Andy McDowell, called Maid, which is based on a memoir about a woman, a working class woman dealing with an abusive husband and navigating, you know, the welfare state and all these other things that are just in the way of her success and her family's thriving. And it's a really good series. I recommend you check it out. You really get to see Margaret Qualley's dramatic chops. And I think she was funny in this film. It's just there wasn't enough. There wasn't enough there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that, you know, basically the character trajectory is Margaret Qualley's character doesn't really change. It's just that, you know, we're supposed to realize that she's not as much of a, you know, as a screw up maybe as she initially appears to be. And the other character basically learns to be a little less serious all the time. And neither of those journeys, if they're even journeys, they're not journeys. They're like sidebars, are enough. And it's a waste because they're both really good. They're contrasting the contrast of the characters, the contrast of the actors' styles is a natural. I mean, that's one of the great strengths. One of the few strengths the movie has going for it, I think, is that they're so ripe for comedy because they do this job of embodying their respective characters, and so the back and forth seems more natural, and it's more naturally going to conflict, which in a funny way, at least it's the potential to be a funny way. And I just felt like the movie didn't even take it enough as much advantage of that as it could have. Jeff, you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I had to laugh when the vehicle they were using was a Chrysler K car, right? It was the late 70s, early 80s. It's just humorous. But maybe you can, again, I'm a little confused. The psychedelic interludes there they had, and I'm wondering if there was a pattern to them. Was there something that you interpreted, except for the last one with Matt Damon in that scene? I had a hard time, or his character in that scene. I had a hard time because of the way the film was going, just trying to interpret what they were trying to message to us with all the psychedelic, I guess, interludes during the film. Maybe you can help explain that. I'd appreciate it.
Paul, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I don't have any grand insight into it. I thought those interludes were fun to look at. I enjoyed them visually. Like you, I wasn't sure what they were leading to. I think we're meant to understand all of those moments as build up to the revelation of Matt Damon in his youth with Cynthia Plastercaster, or whoever the version is in this film. But again, I don't know that at the end, all those interludes served any purpose other than to be nice to look at. You know, they did not, to me, add to the narrative drive of the film, which is very different, say, in The Big Lebowski. I mean, the dream sequences in The Big Lebowski are essential to making that film the great film that it is. There's so much invention in the Coens and how they approach those dreams and those scenes, and they feel of a piece with the rest of the movie. You never feel like those sequences are out of place in the Lebowski movie. But this film, I wasn't sure what purpose they served either, and the payoff scene did not, to me, justify it in the end.
Yeah, I like has been said, but by the end, I realized sort of that was in theory or allegedly building toward the reveal that happens in the last few one or two sort of psychedelic scenes. But again, it's like they think they've put in, like they've laid the groundwork in the movie that will make something make sense, except they haven't done that. I thought it was very odd. I mean, Trisha Cook's an editor, and an editor of obviously some skill given some of the movies she's edited, and it seemed sort of pointedly counterproductive to what I understand the work of an editor to be, and or the motivation, I should say, of an editor's work to be. And now, again, if the movie was structured differently, if the movie sort of had a more consistent buildup toward that reveal, or introduced that character earlier, or something where, you know, we would believe that we were being, you know, something was being hinted at or foreshadowed or built toward or whatever, it might have served a purpose. But I don't think it was constructive. I think, you know, I think it looked cool, and that's, that's not, I mean, that's, you're supposed to have professional, mature filmmakers are supposed to have more discipline than that something looks cool.
Yeah, I'm reminded too of, Howard Hawks has that famous thing that's ascribed to him. I'm assuming he said it. Sounds like he said it. What is it? A good movie is 3 good scenes and no bad scenes. And I felt like there were a lot of unnecessary scenes in the film, including some of those interludes. And the scenes I really am craving experienced aren't there. You know, that's the other side of it. I think there were opportunities missed. And so by Hawks's formula, this doesn't succeed. It's a good reminder, though, that even the great ones, have stinkers. And that's how you hone your craft, is by making all kinds of movies. They can't all be No Country for Old Men. And I have read Ethan in interviews saying movie like No Country really took it out of me, and my brother. And ever since, we've been trying to navigate tone in our different films and to switch things up and not always go the heavy route. And I suspect this film is meant to be in that vein of a break, from the seriousness, like that reviewer pointed out. But that doesn't mean it's effective. Even playtime has to be well structured at the end of the day. And I don't think this was.
Gus.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the waste of talent. I mean, I think they wasted Coleman Domingo in it too. I mean, he just didn't even fit in with the movie as far as I was concerned. He was supposed like basically almost a straight gangster type character. Well, sort of in a way. But the one character I did like was it Curly? Is that what he was?
Yeah. Bill Camp.
That I thought was pretty funny. I have to admit,
Yeah.
Was he still lying on the floor?
Yeah. Yeah, he was awesome. And again, I think they got the best out of him in the scenes we had of him. I didn't feel the same about so many of the other actors. You're right about Coleman Domingo. This guy was just nominated for an Oscar last night, right? And you're underutilizing.
Yeah. Well, I think we've Steve, you have a comment. Okay. Steve, go ahead. Oh, no.
I had to unmute myself. There we go. I had to unmute
Okay.
myself. I had seen the movie this afternoon because I knew we were having the discussion tonight. And in all honesty, I think the first 30 seconds I was so tired, I remember my eyes closed. And all of a sudden I woke up and then I saw the sex scene going on. I said, okay, what's going on here? What do we get ourselves into? I had no idea what the movie was about. I thought it was a fun ride. I thought it was quite confusing, as you're right. I couldn't figure out the psychedelic scenes. I wasn't sure what they were all about. I was trying to piece that together as I was watching the movie as well. The end reveal was, of course, something we've never seen before and totally unexpected. And I thought that was kind of fun to see happen because you were not often taken that much by surprise. And it had a very interesting finish too, where they were going to get off and run off and get married. So there were two people in the movie theater, and as the movie was ending and the credits were rolling, I went downstairs and just watched and listened to the music a little bit. And I said to myself, "Well, this has really been an interesting ride. I've not quite seen something like this before." Then, as I was driving home, I tried to explain to my wife, and I said, "I can't even explain it to you. I have no idea how to explain this movie. I had to look up who the surprise person was, Miley Cyrus, because I knew she looked familiar, but I didn't quite recognize it." I don't know, if you take away all the deep analysis, which I certainly appreciate, that's one of the reasons we benefit from the discussions we hear from you and Paul. And by the way, Paul, I was pretty impressed. You knew that you could remember the other star's you could pronounce the last star's last name. That was pretty good.
No guarantee I got it right, but I was close.
It certainly looked pretty good. It looked pretty good. If you take away all the deep analysis again, which is kind of, you watch a movie, then you try to read the reviews and then you listen to analysis, it certainly comes out differently than maybe different than when you were watching the movie. I just thought it was an interesting, fun ride. It didn't make too much sense. It was piecemeal here and there. That was a little bothersome that it didn't really flow as cleanly as we would like it to, and you didn't know where it was going. But when I finished with it, I said, well, this is kind of an interesting movie to watch. And I had certainly no regrets of going. It did feel a little short. I will say you would have liked to have a little more at the end, like you had mentioned before, Paul. But I thought it was fun. I appreciate Bryn Mawr Film Institute bringing movies like this there so we can watch them and experience them. And I'm not sure how this is going to be generally available, but it's certainly worth a ride. So thanks from that perspective. And if you read the reviews, they are quite mixed. They go from one extreme to the other.
They do.
Yeah, they really.
It's got its defenders.
Yeah,
and I suspect it's going to get some cult classic type traction. Nothing like Lebowski. I don't mean that, but I suspect it will continue to have its defenders. I want to say something I liked about it thematically that again was a missed opportunity overall. When Matt Damon's senator character finally confronts them and makes the handoff, he basically starts complaining about men being commercialized and commodified and objectified. And the irony of that, right, that he's got the gall to say that women who have certainly been through far worse than he has, and say that to two women in a lesbian bar, right?
Yeah.
That irony should hit hard, you know? And I wanted more of that because I think that was the interesting thing to explore in the movie from a deep thematic point of view. And they just didn't bring it out enough. You know, it's almost a throwaway line at the end, but it kind of got my attention. I felt like the movie needed more of this to sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with you, Paul. That was a glimmer at almost the end of a movie that might have been, if they had revealed what was in there earlier in the film, there would have been more opportunities for that sort of commentary, perhaps. Or, you know, if they, you know, if instead of sort of, you know, it being a chase, you know, there was like, you know, the women who had it but didn't really realize what they had, if there were people who knew what it was and didn't want it because they were mercenaries, but for some other, you know, motivated reason based on what the content was, that could have maybe been a more interesting struggle. But just for money, that's, you know, you got to really create interesting people who are, if they're doing something just for money, and that's a higher bar than coming up with a thoughtful premise.
But look how I played with you, Andrew. You know, you didn't know what was in the case. Then they're eating downstairs, and they're having the best champagne they could get, a great meal at the restaurant, the hotel, and then she pulls out her credit card, and so you think there's money in there, and she's spending the money on the meal because that's, you know, she doesn't have that kind of money. How can she lavishly spend like this? And then she says, "I'll put it on my credit card." So you say to yourself, "Well, she's worried about her credit card, and she has all this money from in the case." So you know, they did work on us a little bit from that perspective. So you really didn't know till the end, and I think it was indeed a surprise, which none of us ever expected, and never have seen something like that in a movie before. So again, I looked at it from a rather superficial standpoint, and I just had fun with some of the things that they presented to us for the hour and a half.
In my head canon, which is just a wacky place probably no one ever wants to be in, my dream twist on this would have been, you know, if you could forget Buscemi and Stormare, if you could have gotten Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson chasing them, and now we finally know what was in the case in Pulp Fiction. That would have been an interesting, weird crossover between the Tarantino universe and the Coen-verse, but sadly, I don't think we'll ever see that movie except in my head.
Well, thanks very much, Steve. And thanks everybody for joining us. That's going to wrap it up for tonight, and that's going to wrap it up for our online discussions. We look forward and we reserve the right to have them occasionally in the future when the stars align with a great film worth discussing and our faculties available and so on. But by and large, I don't think that we only had 9 folks with us tonight is just because of the movie. I also think people are going out and they're meeting in person and they're talking in person. They're coming to our classes in person in tremendous numbers, and we really appreciate that. And so we're gonna stop this series. As I said, we will bring it back on a case-by-case basis if the opportunity arises, and we'll be sure to let you know about that via email. But otherwise, you can see on the screen a host of wonderful ways to learn about, talk about movies at the theater with people in person. And we're so glad that we're back to having that be the standard way of doing this.
We've enjoyed it very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Steve. And I know I see Deirdre. I know you're disappointed, but we should all be happy that things are back to the way they were, and we look forward to seeing you all at the theater in a variety of capacities. You can see we've got some great movies going and some great movies coming. We're very happy to have The Zone of Interest coming up. And I'm sure more of you are even more interested in seeing that now after last night. So we appreciate it. Come to the theater, see the movies, come to the classes. If you're not a member, join as a member, and we're very happy to have your support in any way we can get, in any way you choose to give it. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Paul, for joining us.
Thank you too. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
It's been a great run.